Chapter 3, Part 3.1. As Rosie King gazed into the living room fireplace of her new stately home, her two sons entered the living room for their annual Christmas Eve gathering. Rosie, who had been confined to a wheelchair for several years, appeared somewhat detached as she briefly glanced over at her eldest son when he approached her. "Hi, Mum," Rosie's son Paul greeted her. "How are you?" Rosie brightened up upon seeing her son, momentarily emerging from her trance. She replied, "Hi, my love. Is Thomas with you?" referring to her younger son. "Yeah, he's over there," Paul replied, pointing to his brother, who was across the room fixing himself a drink. In a hushed voice, Rosie asked, "Who's that with him?" "It's his new girlfriend, remember? Her name is Sheila," Paul whispered to her, not wanting Sheila to overhear that Rosie couldn't recall her name. "Are Victoria and the girls here with you?" Rosie inquired about Paul's wife and his two daughters. Paul responded, "Not yet. They're on their way. I came directly from work and picked up Thomas and Sheila on the way. Thomas is going to have a few drinks, so I offered to drive." "Thomas never drinks. Is everything okay?" Rosie asked, sounding surprised. "I don't know. I'll look into it," Paul said, adopting a businesslike tone, as if he were speaking to King in a corporate setting. At that moment, Thomas and Sheila approached. "Happy Christmas, Mum," Thomas said as he leaned in to give her a kiss on the cheek. "Happy Christmas, my love. You look so strong. Look at you," Rosie replied. She turned her head upward to address Sheila, a young and stunning Irish model, saying, "Happy Christmas, Sheila." Sheila, a socialite who grew up in the D4 area of Dublin and worked in fashion and modeling while studying to become an interior designer, was pleasantly surprised by how well the house was decorated. It appeared as though it had been lived in for years, with professional Christmas decorations creating a charming holiday atmosphere reminiscent of an old American soap opera Christmas special. Every corner of the spacious house was tastefully adorned with garlands, wreaths, and a magnificent 10-foot Christmas tree. The entire mansion, including the living room, main hall, and the front exterior, had been meticulously decorated. "Yeah, Mom, the place looks great," Thomas remarked. "King must have spent quite a bit to set this up so quickly," he added. Despite King's insistence that his stepchildren call him Dad, Thomas stubbornly referred to him as King. Rosie turned her gaze back to the fire and replied with a touch of bitterness, "If you say so." It was evident that she was unhappy about being forced to move out of Blackstaff Manor during the renovations. To ease the transition and lift Rosie's spirits, some of the furniture from Blackstaff Manor had been relocated by a team of designers, contractors, and painters to ensure it met King's exacting standards. King took exceptional care of Rosie, striving to make her as content as possible given her mental and physical conditions. For over 30 years, Rosie had grown accustomed to receiving everything she desired from King. She had lived a life of luxury with cars, planes, mansions, and an abundance of wealth. Rosie had made a pact with the devil for the good life for herself and her children. Thomas continued, hoping to elicit a positive response from his biological mother. "The house looks like it has been lived in for years." He was aware that Rosie had exhibited signs of depression 15 years ago and had recently fallen into a deep depression, rarely responding to anyone who tried to engage with her. Thomas, determined to keep his mother's attention away from the fire in her trance-like state, asked, "So where is King?" Rosie, becoming increasingly annoyed, replied, "You know he hates being called that by you. He's probably at Blackstaff." "What the hell is he doing over there?" Thomas asked in surprise. "Isn't it under construction?" Rosie, who had returned to her contemplation of the fire, responded, "I don't know. He still goes over there." "Hey, Paul," Thomas called out to his brother across the room. Paul was busy preparing a drink from the well-stocked side table, containing various bottles of alcohol, beers in a silver ice bucket, glasses, coffee, and tea. "Why is King going back to Blackstaff?" "Yeah, I heard that," Paul replied as he settled into the sofa. Apparently, he's had workmen over there for the past few days, setting up the hall so that he could use it as an office or meeting place, or something like that. Why? Thomas inquired, now hearing about this for the first time. Paul explained, I don't know. I went over there yesterday to get some clothes for Mom, and I found that he had set up the main hall as a massive office with large table, sofas, chairs, and a buffet table, a TV, and of course that ugly painting from the library. Every entrance is draped off to the hall, so it's dark as hell. Why did he do that? Thomas asked with a smirk. I thought no one could use Blackstaff until certain renovations were completed. Paul responded, Simple. Cohen stepped in. I assume Cohen offered a solution to the Archaeology Society that they couldn't refuse. He got them to agree to fix the foundations and make other minor alterations to the rooms on the main floor. They allowed King to stay to oversee the renovations on site. You know Cohen. He must have worked his magic. Enough, Rosie interjected, shifting her gaze from the fire to her 3 sons and Sheila, who were sitting on the sofas around the fire alongside her. She knew it could lead to trouble if King walked in on them, talking about him behind his back. Okay, Mom, Paul said, acquiescing to his mother's request. Thomas turned to Sheila and remarked, He's obsessed with that house. He bought it when he was around 30 years old. You saw it. It's massive. It had been abandoned for years before he bought it. I have old pictures of it from before he moved in. It was super creepy and still is. Rosie, again turning her gaze back to the fire, pleaded, Please, love, stop. He'll be here soon. Paul, the more obedient son, added, Sorry, Mom, of course. He also gave Thomas a stern look, signaling to him to cease discussing their father so as not to upset their mother. As they continued to chat about their holiday plans after Christmas, Brennan suddenly appeared from a side door and approached Rosie, saying, Mr. King will be here in a few minutes. Rosie, the matriarch of the family, had 4 children with her late husband, Thomas Sr. Fanning. These included 2 sons, Thomas and Paul, as well as a set of twins, 1 boy and 1 girl. Tragically, the boy Seamus had died in a childhood accident that occurred in Blackstaff Manor. Her daughter Olivia resided in Oxford, England, with her 2 children. Much like her mother, Olivia had been widowed several years ago. She had always harbored a deep disdain for King and he eagerly awaited the opportunity to escape Blackstaff and King's influence. When Olivia turned 17, she fled to London and never returned. What further incensed King was that Olivia refused to accept a penny of his money, a fact that infuriated him to no end. It was widely believed that Olivia's departure and her mother's subsequent solitude in Blackstaff with King had led to Rosie's excess drinking and eventual mental breakdown. To the outside world, few were aware that Thomas, Paul, and Olivia were not King's biological children. This illusion had been carefully cultivated by King over the years, and he would react with fury if anyone dared to suggest otherwise. The memory of their late father had been effectively erased as though he had never existed. Both Thomas and Paul, several years older than the twins, had wholeheartedly embraced the lifestyle and power that King provided them. They spent little time in Blackstaff, having been educated at one of England's top boarding schools, a status symbol that King relished flaunting. Upon their return to Ireland for university, King showered Thomas and Paul with expensive cars, penthouse apartments in Dublin, extravagant vacations, and substantial sums of money, further reinforcing their status among Dublin's elite. Ironically, King couldn't stand Rosie's children deep down. To him, they were merely props that enhanced his overall image and served a purpose. This was equally true for Rosie herself. She was a piece in his meticulously constructed image. Love was a foreign concept to King, a feeling he was incapable of due to his psychopathy. Olivia, being exceptionally astute, had recognized this dynamic from a young age. King used everyone around him, and Olivia refused to participate in this facade. She understood that King's idolized life, which she had purchased, was incomplete without her willing submission. The living room was brightly lit compared to the rest of the house. The cook and butler would continue to serve dinner for another 3 hours before they could return home to celebrate Christmas Eve with their own families. Brennan, the butler, moved in and out of the living room, tending to the guests as they awaited King's arrival. Paul, the eldest stepson, was still anticipating the arrival of his wife and 2 daughters. Although not as scared by his experiences in Blackstaff as his sister, he was far from a normal person compared to the carefree child who had moved into Blackstaff at the age of 8. Now 37 years old, Paul had struggled with drug addiction for the past 15 years. Publicly, he was considered the heir apparent to King's empire, so any issues in his personal life were kept closely guarded secrets within the upper echelons of Irish society and politics. Paul had few responsibilities, and King ensured it stayed that way. Paul, however, relished his access to limitless wealth, using it to entertain clients, friends, and especially long-term marks. He enjoyed the privileges of having access to the company jet whenever he desired. Sporting events, exclusive clubs, and countless other activities were all part of Paul's extravagant lifestyle. His favorite destination was Las Vegas, where he often treated guests to boxing or mixed martial arts events and all the extravagance Sin City had to offer. King was adept at harnessing everyone's strengths, including Paul's, for his own benefit. Paul's knack for having a good time was no exception. It was where he felt most at home and where he truly shined. However, his exuberance occasionally clashed with King's carefully cultivated public image, forcing King to rewrite history, particularly when it came to how Paul met his wife. Contrary to the official narrative that Paul met his wife while pursuing a master's degree at the London School of Economics, they had actually met at a Spanish drug rehabilitation center where the London socialite was also seeking treatment. King often remarked that Paul and his wife were meant to be together. Thomas, the second oldest son, was the savvier of the 2 brothers. He knew how to play along with King's desires without causing offense. If King could count on any son, it was Thomas. Thomas was the archetypal playboy, handsome, athletic, and a collector of fast cars, boasting a multi-million-dollar collection. He abstained from drugs and rarely drank, which earned King's approval, as King himself did not drink. Thomas was ambitious and responsible, qualities that King held in high regard. While Thomas did not particularly like King on a personal level, he valued the millions he received as a director of King's non-beef businesses, especially King's extensive property and property development portfolio, though Irish Energy remained in a special category directly monitored by King. Over the years, the once close friendship between Paul and Thomas had deteriorated. While they remained civil, Paul's growing jealousy of Thomas was undeniable. Thomas had become King's favorite, and King didn't hesitate to remind Paul of this fact. While Paul occasionally defied King due to his addictions, he did everything in his power to please him, even compromising his sobriety to entertain King's business associates. Although Paul never actively sabotaged Thomas in the hopes of winning King's favor, such thoughts did cross his mind. Thomas, however, had no intention of ingratiating himself to King the way Paul did. He had managed to build a substantial nest egg for himself and was prepared to use it to create a future apart from King's shadow. At only 35, he believed he had his entire life ahead of him. Ultimately, Thomas viewed Paul as weak. While he felt sympathy for his brother, he remained protective of Paul and his young family. He understood that Paul's loyalty primarily lay with King, and he was aware that Paul's repeated missteps were not his problem. Thomas prided himself on his diligent work ethic and his commitment to never mishandle King's money. That was Thomas's golden rule. Thomas recognized that he could mock King on occasion without facing exile. He understood that King needed him for the family narrative. The idea of explaining that not only had his daughter Olivia cut ties with him, but now his son Thomas as well, would be a public relations nightmare even King couldn't spin. Thomas was a crucial component of the story, and he knew it. "Victoria's here," Paul said, checking his phone and informing his mother, who had returned to her contemplation of the fire. "I'm going to help her with the girls and the gifts." As Paul arose from the couch and headed towards the main hall of the house, Brennan entered the room and addressed Rosie. "Madam, Mr. King was caught up in town and will be arriving a few minutes late."